Good morning, English 111. So, I am going to give you guys a quick tutorial on sort of what each section of our course's Blackboard site is for in a little bit more detail because some of you have expressed confusion about just what I want you to do on the various lecture and discussion board sections. So this is just going to be a very fast rundown of each of those sections where I will be guiding you through what I'd like you to do in each of them, and I'll also be showing you model responses for each of the sections that I've created. So we'll start off by accessing, in this case, English 111 D16's course Blackboard site. If you are in English 111 D18, the process is identical, so don't sweat it. From there, we'll go to the discussions section. Again, content is where you'll find things like long assignments, like response papers and readings. And the discussion board section is really where things will be a lot more sort of like daily use oriented. Basically, the discussion board section is where you want to look on any given day that we would normally have class to find lectures, class discussions, and journal entries. And I'll do my best to have those posted well in advance of when our class would normally meet. But if you do ever have trouble finding anything, just send me an email. It is possible that I will omit something, or like in the case of today's lecture, I actually did not put up an accompanying class discussion post. So let's start off with the lectures section. So each of the lectures here is dated and has a subject associated with it. So for instance, today's lecture, source, literacy, and library resources is, pretty clearly labeled. It's also very long. So this is about 10 pages long all told. And it has a formatting error in it. I'll fix that in a second. After reading this, you may very justifiably have questions about it. And normally I would ask you to actually post those questions in a separate section called discussion board. But if you actually read this particular post, you'll notice that at the very end, I actually ask you to post your questions about this particular lecture by replying to the lecture in question. And like I said, I'm going to correct the formatting error in a second and come back to this. But yeah, in this case, you would actually post your response to this lecture by replying to it and then resolving it that way. For other assignments, you will actually want to do something a little bit different, but the larger point is that this is where the course lectures live. Instead of hearing me talk like this, you're just going to want to read through these, and then if you have any questions, I'd recommend writing down some notes and then bring those up in the discussion section. So for comparison, the tone and gun control section, as you can see, it's a little bit shorter and kind of just like ends on a button that doesn't invite you to ask questions. That is because for the tone and gun control lecture, there is actually a corresponding discussion board post. So let's go over to the main discussion board section again, to the class discussion section. So the class discussion section is where you'll go to make class discussion posts, and these are the posts that I will use to document your attendance for the virtual class in question. And in addition to that sort of like virtual attendance, you'll also just, have a chance to actually ask questions about the readings. So if we click on this, you'll see that there is currently only one thread associated with that gun control and tone reading. And that class discussion question has a series of prompts that I ask you to potentially respond to. So here, the question is, did you find any of these articles especially convincing? Did any of these articles upset you? Why do you think you responded that way to one or more of them? Did you see any rhetorical appeals we discussed before the break at work in these articles? which ones and were they effectively utilized. Talking through this with your classmates and me would be a great way to test out different ideas for your second response paper. After reading the lecture, you might want to talk through some of the tones in these articles. Did you notice any tones employed by the authors effectively or ineffectively? Discuss the impact that one or more tonal choices an author made had on your experience with an article for this section, from this section. And is there anything else you'd like to talk through about these articles? Passages you found challenging, stats you found mind-blowing, or ideas that seemed weird or silly to you? Bring them up here. This is, after all, where we're simulating class discussions as much as we can. That means that awkward silences are kind of a part of this too, I guess, since that's a part of our class. But for the most part, I actually do want you guys to respond to at least one of these. And you'll notice that some of them are quite specific. The first three present questions that you could use as prompts to write very short entries to. And then the last one kind of opens this discussion up a bit so that you can actually sort of like, engage with the material a bit more thoroughly. So in order to actually respond to this post, you're going to want to reply to it the same way that Anthony and Candy did. So when you create a response, you'll get a little text window here, and then you'll just want to type up a brief response. It doesn't need to be super, super long, but it should actually represent engagement with the material. So if you were to write something like this, clearly you didn't do the reading and you didn't actually, review the lecture, so that's a problem. If you were to say something that is just a complete non sequitur, that doesn't really have anything to do with the discussion we're having. It's just kind of tangentially related to the subject matter. A response like that would not be appropriate in this case. Yeah, so what you really just want to do is type up something that briefly actually responds to one of these questions or that represents your legitimate interaction with these articles. So here I'm just going to demonstrate something that blends those two things into just a brief response. So I'm going to start by actually talking about my generalized response to these articles. Sorry, I just made you watch me type, but I hope it wasn't too boring. I did have derp writing face as I was doing it. So as you can see, I essentially typed up a response to the initial prompt there. And then I am now going to type up a response to actually the second question here. So I even kind of included a brief transitional phrase there, but you'll notice that these responses are both pretty brief. In fact, they total about 200 words, which is a little less than a page. And if you were to write something like this in response to a discussion prompt, you'd be set. You're fine. It demonstrates that you clearly did the reading, right? You wouldn't know that about Libresco's article unless you actually read Libresco's article. And it also indicates that you are engaging with the course material, which is the other reason that I'm having you complete these discussion questions, to show that you are actively engaged in the readings and that you are also actually considering the readings in the context of what we're discussing. In this case, we're primarily focused on the rhetorical appeals, but if you were to discuss tone or just overarching effectiveness, yeah, that would be totally appropriate for this as well. You can also just kind of talk about whatever you like as long as it engages with that cloud of items. Once you've completed typing your response, you'll want to click the Submit button in the lower right-hand corner of the page. There's a pretty good chance that this is blocked by my dumb face, so I'm going to scroll up a little and click Submit up here just to make sure it actually shows up. Once you've clicked Submit, you'll see that your discussion thread was created. Alright, so that's 2 of our class forums. Let's go to the last forum. So the last forum for our class that you'll want to keep track of is the journal entry forum. And the journal entry forum is just a list of prompts with dates associated with them. So each journal entry date will appear on this, and you'll usually have about 72 hours to complete those journal entries. During the transitional period at the end of March, I'll be giving you until March 31st to complete all of them. So for instance, if you were to respond to the journal entry on 3/17 on 3/30, you'd be totally fine. You'd receive full credit for that journal entry. But if you try and post all of your journal entry responses on the last day of class, you will not receive credit for those journal entries. And like I said, 72 hours is just 3 days. So as long as you respond to the journal entry prompts within 3 days of their initial posting, you'll always be okay. One other note about these before I go on to modeling a response. If you have already submitted a journal to me, you should have received notification of the credit you've received on those journal entries. And that's pretty much all you needed. So you don't need to send those journal entries to me. If you submitted journal entries to me through an alternative method, like you sent me screenshots of them, that's not ideal, but it is acceptable. I will give people credit for it. I believe I did that with LaShawn, if memory serves at this point, from English 111 D16. It's a lot of work for you guys, which is why I don't like it, and it also keeps you from having a written record of submitting your work to me. But yeah, the journal entries forum is basically just where I want you to post things, and if you just type up your journal entries here, yeah, that's awesome. So, speaking of LaShawn, top points for being the first person to post. Way to go. I'm going to type up a quick model reply to this journal entry. So, in this case, the journal entry prompt is a prompt from our class, or it's basically what the prompt would have been during our class lecture. Which of the gun control articles did you find more convincing? Why did you feel this way? Tie the rhetorical appeals from our last class into your discussion for full credit. As you can see, LaShawn did a great job of that right here. We got, Calamer's article was the most convincing. Yeah. You're tempting me to not write a model post. This was so on point. But you present a perspective, you support that perspective, and you tie it into the appeals. That's all you really needed. So, let me do kind of a version of what I was doing before. I'm going to switch it up and type something I don't actually believe. So, I'll do that real quick. I think because I'm doing this in real time, you can see that occasionally uh, Blackboard will label words as misspelled when they are not misspelled in this case because spelled correctly, but it's labeled as misspelled. I have no idea why it does that. Um, yeah, so I actually created this model response to showcase a response that would be technically wrong but would still receive full credit for this assignment. So I state that I liked French's gun control article, and then I go on to explain why. But if you guys read this carefully, you'll notice that when I talk about logical appeal, I'm not actually discussing the manner in which French presented evidence or actually supported his claims using evidence by describing the relationship between the evidence and the claim. I'm actually stating that it was the values he presented and the opinions he presented that made me think that he was correct. And that's actually an example of an ethical appeal where someone is utilizing a shared perspective to get their audience to agree with them. So, even though I'd be wrong in this post, um, I did make an honest effort, which would make this post totally acceptable. I also typed it up in about 5 minutes, which, you probably don't want to do. You guys have the clock. You can see how long I actually spent typing this up. But you'll normally want to take about 10 to 15 minutes to complete these posts. I wouldn't go beyond that. Remember, they are just journal entries. It's just an honest response that shows that you did the readings and that you thought critically about the question. So as long as you did that, you should be fine. Again, once you complete your response to this, you'll just want to click submit and you'll be all set. Um, yeah, and as you can see, you can clearly see that this journal entry was created right there. Yeah, and I'm going to do one thing just to keep this from getting cluttered. I am going to delete this journal entry. And then I'm actually going to go back to the discussion, the class discussion forum, to showcase one last way you can get credit on class discussion, just really, really quickly. So we already covered creating your own post, but there is actually another way that you can get credit for participating in class discussions, and that is by replying to another student's post. Now, I'm not going to do this to Candy or Anthony because I don't want to flood your inbox with professor commented on my post comments, because that'll happen when you respond to someone's post. But if you were to respond to a comment that another classmate made, that would actually count towards your class participation as well. Yeah. So here I would just type out a brief response that indicates that I read this post and that I actually kind of internalized it. So So as you can see, I am building off of something that I just said in the previous post, and I'm kind of responding to it. I'm not trying to attack my past me's ideas. I'm just kind of giving a sense of how my response to these articles was different, and I'm also referencing a detail in passing, the outreach programs, that you will know about if you read Libresco's article, and you would totally be lost by if you didn't. And it's totally okay to drop references like that when you're working on posts like these. You don't need to define every last little thing. You should write these with the presumption that your audience has actually read the articles in question. So I'm going to submit this, and as you can see, it'll post as sort of being feathered below the other posts, so I'll be able to see that it was a response to someone else's post. And again, you will receive full class participation credit for participating in this way. And then, just to sort of close this out, I'm going to delete these posts really quickly. You can also edit these posts as well if you'd like. That's what I'll be doing to the lecture posts as soon as I finish this video and let it kind of upload on YouTube. So if you notice that you wrote something with typos or that you failed to capitalize stuff, no, I'm kidding. I'm not going to be concerned with that stuff, but if you do want to clean up your posts at all, you should feel free to do so after the fact. Again, these don't need to be really, really thorough responses. They just need to represent engagement with the material, and as long as you make an honest effort on that front, I'll always give you guys class participation credit. So, like, just to give you an example of non-professor responses that are totally okay, everything you've seen on the discussion board at this point, Anthony's posts, Candy's posts, and LaShawn's posts, they are totally fine. Everything you guys are doing is great. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. And as I close this out, I am just going to delete that post to keep this from getting cluttered with Professor BS. And I'm not going to make you watch me troubleshoot this one or wait for it to load. I guess it did then. All right. If you do have any questions about this or any other aspect of our course at this point, please let me know. I'll be doing another video on probably Monday or Tuesday, going over how to use Word's commenting toolkit, just to familiarize you guys with that, because that's what I'll be asking you to do for the full class workshop. And if you have any questions about either the most recent lecture or any of this stuff, feel free to email me or ideally post your questions to these forums that I just went over. Have an awesome weekend, and stay safe and stay healthy, guys.